Night 2 of the Democratic presidential debate in Detroit started with a handshake and a plea from former Vice President Joe Biden to California Senator Kamala Harris. Go easy on me, kid. This go-round, it was more than just Harris criticizing the man leading the Democratic field.
Mr. Vice President, you want to be President of the United States, you need to be able to answer the tough questions.
Mr. Vice President, you can't have it both ways. You invoke President Obama more than anybody in this campaign. You can't do it when it's convenient and then dodge it when it's not.
Mr. Vice President, your argument is not with me, it's with science. And unfortunately, your plan is just too late.
Under Vice President Biden's analysis, am I serving in Congress resulting in the deterioration of the family because I had access to quality, affordable daycare? I just want to know what he meant when he said that.
So we consider how last night shapes the race going forward with Stu Rothenberg, senior editor of Inside Elections, Karine Jean-Pierre, a senior advisor to MoveOn.org, and Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report and host of Politics with Amy Walter on WNYC Radio. To all of you, second night of the debate. It's now behind us. Let me ask each one of you, and I'll start with you, Amy. Clearly, Joe Biden was taking incoming from a lot of directions last night. What was your main takeaway, though, from this debate?
Well, that he did. That's exactly what you saw, was that they came after Joe Biden. And look, there were times where he looked a little shaky, times that he looked stronger. I think overall, though, he weathered it pretty well. There was nothing that happened last night that would lead you to believe that he has now been taken from his perch as the front runner. The other person who got a lot of incoming was Kamala Harris, who had a great first debate, and as such was a big target for the other people on the stage. She was fine, but she also had to endure a lot of grilling, and she spent a lot of time on her heels instead of where she was in the first debate, which was completely on offense.
And we're going to look at some of that in just a second. Karine, what was your main takeaway?
Yeah, pretty much of what Amy just said. I think, look, Joe Biden came into Detroit as the front runner. He's going to leave Detroit as the front runner. He didn't have a knockout punch, if you will, and he didn't get knocked out as well. And he was, he was a little shaky himself, but he didn't do any damage to himself either. And I wouldn't be surprised if his numbers go up a bit because one of the things that he did do was defend the Obama legacy, which, as we know, what's propelling his numbers is the African-American community who love Obama, who love the fact that Joe Biden was his VP. Look, Judy, we saw 6 hours of debate over the last 2 nights, and we saw some folks do really well, like Warren and Buttigieg and Bernie and Biden. But I don't think much will change moving forward. I don't think whoever came in the tier 1 will be tier 1. Whoever came in tier 2 will be tier 2. And the folks who came in the lower tier will probably not make it to the next debate in June, I'm sorry, not in June, in September, which will be in Houston.
And Stu, what's your top line?
I'll be the tougher grader tonight. Look, I think Joe Biden did better than the first debate, but of course that was not difficult. He had a terrible first debate. So he was better. He counterattacked better. He had research against Booker that he could use. So he was better. But I thought his performance was very uneven. I don't think he has shown that he is very agile in these debates, and that is a problem. So while he's better off, I think he still has to answer some questions. And Kamala Harris, that was really remarkable. She apparently thought she was going to have an easy go and very quickly found out that you won the first debate doesn't mean you're going to win the second debate. I thought throughout much of the debate, she looked bored, uninterested, and deflated.
Well, you and Amy both mentioning Kamala Harris, and we're going to show a couple of sections of last night's debate, but let's start with the piece where Harris was clearly a target. This has to do with health care. Let's watch this.
The senator's had several plans so far, and anytime someone tells you you're going to get something good in 10 years, you should wonder why it takes 10 years. If you notice, there's no talk about the fact that the plan in 10 years will cost $3 trillion. You will lose your employer-based insurance.
Unfortunately, Vice President Biden, you're just simply inaccurate in what you're describing. The reality is that our plan will bring health care to all Americans under a Medicare for All system. Your plan, by contrast, leaves out almost 10 million Americans.
Senator Harris is my friend as well, but I have to say, if we can't admit tonight what's in the plan, which is banning employer-based insurance, we're not going to be able to admit that when Donald Trump is accusing Democrats of doing that as well. We need to be honest about what's in this plan. It bans employer-based insurance and taxes the middle class to the tune of $30 trillion.
So, Amy Walter, what is it about Kamala Harris's plan that's attracting all this criticism?
Well, this is the sort of continuation of the debate that we had on the first night between those Democrats who want to go much further beyond Obama, the boundaries of Obamacare, into some form of Medicare for all, and those like Senator Bennett, Joe Biden, who want to build on the Obamacare. But look, fundamentally, I think this is why parties don't like primary debates, because they spend a whole lot of time arguing with each other, going into the weeds on a lot of policies, and they're not able to, at this stage of the game, talk about the things that actually Democratic voters, but all voters, say they're the most worried about with healthcare, which is cost, especially prescription drug cost and surprise medical bills and high deductions. None of that was discussed in these two debates, in part because they're arguing over ideology. Now that's fine because it's a primary and they are trying to appeal to primary voters. But you can see why this is such a challenging experience for party establishment and party leaders, because they would like to see the Democrats stop fighting amongst each other, focus on the president, and focus especially on healthcare in the same way that Democrats did in 2018.
And speaking of which, Karine, today, President Trump put out a statement early this morning in which, among other things, he said, over the last 2 days, Americans saw Democrats arguing about how the government will take over their health insurance, eliminate their private plans, give taxpayer-funded health care to illegal immigrants, raise taxes to pay for it all.
So this is the thing that really troubled me a lot last night, which was that they didn't bring up Donald Trump, right? The person that they want to beat in 2020. They litigated the Obama legacy, the Obama policies, but there is an existential threat of Donald Trump, and that barely came up. And we have, a president who believes he's above the law. There's the his immigration policies. He's in court right now, his administration, trying to take health care away from tens of millions of people. So that is the thing that I thought was really lacking, and just that contrast with Donald Trump, which is what voters want to hear. They want to hear from these folks, not just about the policies, but the number one thing is, how are they going to beat Donald Trump?
Well, let's look at another example last night. This is on immigration, where Vice President Biden, President Obama's policies came under criticism.
Open borders is a right-wing talking point. And frankly, I'm disappointed that some folks, including some folks on this stage, have taken the bait. The only way that we're going to guarantee that we don't have family separations in this country again is to repeal Section 1325 of the Immigration and Nationality Act.
The Secretary, we sat together in many meetings. I never heard him talk about any of this when he was the Secretary. The fact of the matter is, you should be able to, if you cross the border illegally, you should be able to be sent back. It's a crime.
First of all, Mr. Vice President, it looks like one of us has learned the lessons of the past and one of us hasn't. Let me begin by telling you there's still going to be consequences if somebody crosses the border. It's a civil action.
I have guts enough to say his plan doesn't make sense. The fact of the matter is, I think the President of the United States, Barack Obama, went out of his way to try to change the system, and he got pushed back significantly.
So, Stu Rothenberg, is this a good discussion for the Democrats to be having right now?
It's not, and I don't think it's a good discussion for Joe Biden to be having with Julian Castro to talk about immigration and the border and people coming in the United States. And goes back to actually one of the earlier sound bites where Senator Booker said, it's one thing, you like to embrace Barack Obama and you're part of that administration. But when you don't want to, you say suddenly, oh, I can't discuss it. I think this is one of those areas where the former vice president is not very sharp or agile, and he needs to get better.
And Amy, this really does pick up on your comment earlier about this is a tough, all three of you are making this point. It's tough during the primaries when the Democrats are trying to distinguish themselves from one another, but in so doing, they potentially are hurting each other.
That's right. And remember, there's another incentive structure involved in here, which is how you get on the debate stage in the first place. These debates have been set up this way, and we have 2 nights. This is the second set of debates where we have to go 2 nights with 10 candidates each because of backlash from Democrats, those in the Democratic sort of activist area, about how the 2016 debates were created. They said there were too few of them, that Bernie Sanders didn't get enough time and the right amount of time to showcase himself, challenge Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And so their answer to that was to say, we need to have lots of debates and make sure we open it up to everybody, get as many people involved as possible. Well, the way to get on that stage is also to try to create as many of these moments as possible, right? To speak to the base, the low-dollar donors who are going to be able to get you back onto that stage. You get enough of those low-dollar donors, you get another chance to come on stage. And so it only encourages more of this kind of infighting.
Now, Karine, I want you to comment. I'm going to play this final chunk from the debate. This is on criminal justice reform. Again, the candidates criticizing each other. Let's listen.
Mr. Vice President has said that since the 1970s, every major crime bill, major and minor, has had his name on it. And sir, those are your words, not mine. And this is one of those instances where the House was set on fire and you claimed responsibility for those laws. And you can't just now come out with a plan to put out that fire.
There was nothing done for the entire 8 years he was mayor. There was nothing done to deal with the police department that was corrupt. Why did you announce in the first day a zero-tolerance policy of stop and frisk and hire Rudy Giuliani's guy in 2007 when I was trying to get rid of the crack cocaine disparity?
Mr. Vice President, there's a saying in my community, you're dipping into the Kool-Aid and you don't even know the flavor.
Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana.
I am proud of that work. And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor, but actually doing the work of being in the position to use the power that I had to reform a system that is badly in need of reform.
So, Karine, this is getting personal. Who comes out of a discussion, an exchange like that, looking stronger?
So this is really interesting, what you just played, Judy, because this is a very good example of the 2 front runners being on the defense. And when you're a front runner, this is what's going to happen. Your record is going to be scrutinized. And we know with Biden, his crime bill that he co-authored, I shouldn't say his crime bill, but the crime bill that he co-authored has always been something that's been out there since we've known that he was going to run before he stepped into this into the arena. And he hasn't really dealt with it. You know, he hasn't really talked about it in a way that people feel like he understands how much the crime bill has affected the Black and brown community. Now, with Kamala Harris, that was the first time that she was pushed on her record as a prosecutor. And we're going to see this over and over again because you have to try and figure out how to defend your record. And that is going to be kind of on the chopping blocks, if you will.
And so, Stu, what are we left with here?
We're left, I believe, with Harris and Biden still having a lot of questions after this debate. Seemed weaker than they should have been. That probably means that Warren and Sanders are looking a bit stronger. And that is a problem for Democratic strategists who believe the party needs to move to the center, not to the populist progressive wing.
In just 15 seconds, Amy, and we don't have another debate for 6 weeks.
We don't, and it should be a smaller debate. But I think that what a lot of folks want to see then, to Stu's point, is Joe Biden, Harris, and Warren and Sanders all on the same debate stage.
And perhaps we will see that in September. Thank you all, Amy Walter, Karine Jean-Pierre, Stu Rothenberg.
Thanks, Judy.
You're welcome.